Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Essentials. My name is Dale Franklin, and it's my pleasure to host you here again and take you through what proves to be some of the trickiest legislation ever proposed in South Africa. The two-pot system will, when implemented, will have one of the most profound effects on the financial advisor community, where the whole game will change. Luckily, we have been given a brief reprieve, which I'm very grateful for. So we have got another year to grapple with this legislation, but there's certainly a lot to understand about it. I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Mark Saunders. Mark Saunders heads investment consulting and advisory businesses for Anchor. Mark has been in the pension fund world for the last 30 years and is certainly an expert in all areas around this. Mark, you can turn on your camera now. Just a reminder, if any of you are on for a CPD point, please stay on for the full hour. There's a Q&A function at the bottom. Please put your questions in the Q&A and we'll try handle as much as we can towards the end. And with that, over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Dale. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the session. I believe we have quite a turnout based on the initial registrations for the presentation. I was a bit concerned with the title. I figured maybe the IFAs out in the marketplace, I probably figured maybe we're starting another agri-fund or something like that based on the title of the presentation. But in fact, as Dale said, it's not. It's all around the legislation around the two-pot system and retirement funds. And what I'm going to do today is unpack what is in the draft legislation. It hasn't been finalized. Initially, what happened was that they drafted the legislation. They then sent the draft out for comment to the public. And the public had to submit their comments based on the draft legislation to Treasury by the 15th of July. And then based on that, Treasury then put a response together based on the public's comments or questions. They put a commentary out. In fact, they presented to the Standing Committee of Finance yesterday morning. And in that presentation, they actually presented their findings and their comments based on the public's questions. And they then decided to change one or two things. So although I put my presentation together last week, I had to make a few minor changes this morning because the news only hit us yesterday afternoon about the different changes that they're looking at making. Obviously, this hasn't been finalized yet, so there's still one or two gray areas, and it still has to be approved by legislation before it's actually enacted. As Dale said, they've now delayed the actual implementation. Initially, it was going to kick in 1 March 2024. However, that has now changed, and they've delayed it by a year. And the reason for that is that they believe that, one, the industry wasn't ready. I think most 13B administrators out there who administer pension and provident funds and retirement annuities and the like are almost ready, or most of them are almost ready based on what we've heard in the industry. But I think there's still a lot to be done. As you know, most retirement funds have a set of rules. And most of those, and all of those rules will have to be changed or amended and approved by the FSCA before they can actually be enacted on, or acted on. And so most retirement funds still have to go through that full process before they can actually start applying the new legislation. And that is really the reason why they delayed it to 1 March 2025, is just to give retirement funds a bit more breathing space. There has been a lot of communication that has gone out to the various staff members of companies and the members of retirement funds. So I think the industry as a whole has done a good job around that. But I think it's still ironing out the grey areas within the legislation, getting that approved, and then allowing all the funds to then submit the various rule amendments that need to be submitted to the FSCA. So how did we get to this point? Well, I think government has been on a journey. I think the main concern was that, two things. One is that, and as we know, South Africans don't like to save. And so they're really forced to save when they belong to a retirement fund. Despite the forced savings, and not every company has a retirement fund, but despite that forced savings, there's still a very low percentage of South Africans that are actually retiring comfortably. What is retiring comfortably? It's really enjoying the same standard of living that you enjoyed while you were working when you're in retirement. And now there's a number that's been bandied around for a number of years now. Most big retirement fund companies in the industry use this number, and they're saying that only about 6% of South Africans actually retire comfortably. And so this whole reform journey that the government has embarked on is all around trying to get people, or a lot more people, a higher percentage of South Africans actually retiring comfortably. And so when they looked at retirement reform, the big focus was on that. And then the other issue, and which was unexpected, was COVID. I think we all know of someone or had a family member or experienced it in our personal capacity where we actually, when we were going through COVID and we were going through the various lockdown periods and that sort of thing, there's a number of first people that were retrenched because the companies just couldn't continue operating. You had a number of people that had salary reductions, and they didn't really have access to money, access to easy finances to assist them in their day-to-day living. Yes, retirement funds or the FSCA allowed retirement funds to stop contributions, and you had to amend your rules to allow for that during that period. So that did offer some households a bit of reprieve, and by doing that, it gave them a bit of breathing room by not having to contribute to a retirement fund. But when they decided what they were going to do around the two-pot system, it was really around giving members access to money or easy money and using the retirement fund as a vehicle. And so, as I mentioned, we've gone through this retirement reform journey where they've tried to do various things within the retirement funds. It started back in March 2016, where they looked at the tax deduction with regards to the contributions that you make to retirement funds, and they actually harmonized the contributions where they said that you'll get a tax deduction of 27.5% of the grades of your taxable income or your total remuneration, which you can. So what they're really saying is that you can contribute towards a retirement fund vehicle up to 27.5%, and you'll get a tax deduction on that. However, that was capped at 350,000 Rand per year. Then in March 2021, they decided to change the way retirement benefits are paid from provident funds going forward. And as we know that from a pension fund, when you retire, you can take 1/3 in cash, and the other 2/3 you're forced to purchase an annuity or a pension. And so they wanted to align provident funds with the same methodology at retirement. And so now, with effect from 1 March 2021, if you retire from a provident fund, you would have to apply the same methodology where you can take 1/3 in cash and the other 2/3 you're forced to purchase an annuity. And then we have the two-pot system. And so, and I'll talk to the two-pot system in more detail on the next slides. But as I mentioned, this is now going to kick in 1 March 2025. Now, they refer to this as the two-pot system, but as you'll see in my presentation, it's actually 2, 3, or 4 pots. So it's not actually just 2 pots. It depends on what fund you belong to. And when you join that fund, you may have additional pots within this whole retirement saving system. So what is this, the two-pot system? Well, very simple. As I mentioned earlier, when you get to retirement, you can take out 1/3 in cash. The other 2/3 you have to use to purchase a pension. That pension is paid to you on a monthly basis for the rest of your retirement. But again, it depends on what type of pension you buy. With all of you being IFAs on the call, you're familiar with the different pensions or annuities that you have available in the marketplace. And then obviously your 1/3 cash benefit is subject to the retirement funds tax tables. And it starts off with the first 500,000 Rand being tax-free. So how does the two-part retirement savings system work? Well, it's very simple. They apply the same methodology. The only difference is that they allow you to take your 1/3 earlier, so before retirement, as opposed to waiting until retirement. And so what did they say? They say that as part of the proposed legislation is that on an annual basis, you can take out 1/3 of the contributions that you've made to the fund from 1 March 2025. However, it's subject to a minimum amount of 2,000 Rand per year. And then the talk around how that amount will, and that's just the minimum amount, 2,000 Rand. And they still need to decide on how they're going to tax that amount as you take it out on an annual basis. So there's talk that it will be taxed at your marginal rate, or based on what was released yesterday, they may look at a withholding tax process, and they'll apply for, and instead of applying for a tax directive like you would with your normal retirement fund cash benefit, in this instance, they would look at a set rate based on either your marginal rate or whatever withholding tax rate they may apply at that particular point in time. I think what's key about that is that the talk is that your gross income, so if you take out that 1/3 during that tax year, your gross income for that year will actually increase. Okay, then I mentioned that, or just looking at it from in a different format, essentially, and as I mentioned, you will have not just two parts, but depending on where you are in your retirement journey and when you join the fund, you may have more than 2 parts. So looking at a member that belonged to a pension fund prior to 1 March 2025, he will have what we call a vested pot or a vested component, and that is any retirement savings that a member had prior to 1 March 2025. Then you have a savings pot or a savings component, and what will happen with this component is that from 1 March 2025, 1/3 of your monthly contribution will be allocated to the savings pot, and the other 2/3 will be allocated to a retirement pot or retirement component. And what they're going to do with effect from 1 March 2025 is actually seed your savings pot. And what they're saying is that they will take 10% of whatever you've saved up to 1 March 2025, subject to a maximum of 30,000 Rand, and they will transfer that from your vested pot to your savings pot. Now, up until yesterday, this amount was 25,000 Rand, so the maximum. And there's still talk that they may increase this to 40,000 Rand. So from the 1st of March 2025, you'll automatically have 10% of your savings transferred from the vested pot to the savings pot, and that'll be subject to a maximum of 30,000 Rand. From a Provident Fund member point of view, and this gets slightly more complicated now, and this is where I say that you could have, in theory, 5 pots. So if you were a member of a Provident Fund prior to 1 March 2021, that whole change with regards to how the retirement benefit would be paid was implemented on that date. And so what they said is that any amount saved up until 1 March 2021, you could still access that amount as a cash benefit at retirement. So let's say you had 100,000 Rand saved prior to 1 March 2021. That 100,000 Rand is still available to you as a Provident Fund member, and it can be paid to you as a cash benefit. Any amount that you contributed from 1 March 2021 to 1 March 2025 that is now what we call a non-vested portion. Now, what that means is that when you get to retirement age, you would then only be able to access 1/3 of that non-vested portion in cash, and the other 2/3 you're forced to purchase an annuity. Obviously, if you decide to resign from the company and you want to withdraw your funds from the Provident Fund, this full benefit is payable to you as at your resignation days within the vested pot. So the non-vested portion only applies at retirement age. They will still be seeding your savings pot with a 10% subject to the maximum of 30,000 Rand, and then your contributions will be split 1/3, 2/3 going forward from 1 March 2025. When you retire from a Provident Fund and you have this non-vested portion, you will use both the non-vested portion as well as whatever's saved in this retirement pot to calculate or to use as the amount to purchase your annuity. Now, there is a de minimis amount, and that de minimis says that if the retirement savings that you have in this non-vested portion and this retirement pot is currently less than 165,000 Rand, you can then take the full benefit out in cash. You're not forced to purchase annuity. And where do they come up with a two-pot system? Well, it's very simple. If you join a retirement fund from 1 March 2025, you'll effectively only have two pots. You'll have a savings pot where 1/3 of your contributions will go into the savings pot, and then you'll have the 2/3 going into your retirement pot, which means that this full portion within your retirement pot has to be used to purchase annuity. What they're also saying is, if I jump back to this slide, is that you can transfer money at any time, and they call it an intra-fund transfer. And you can transfer any amount from your savings pot to your retirement fund pot at any time. Obviously, you'll only then be able to touch that portion when you get to retirement age. And again, you can transfer any amount from your vested pot to your retirement pot at any time. But again, you'll only be able to access that money when you get to retirement age. And obviously, you'll be forced to purchase an annuity with that portion. Okay, so what does that mean from a savings withdrawal perspective? It means that if we go back to the pots, as I mentioned earlier, you can access whatever's available in the savings pot on an annual basis. The minimum amount that you can take out is 2,000 Rand. So let's say you're a high salary earner, as a practical example, and you contributing the maximum of that 350,000 Rand per annum to your retirement fund. Effectively, you're going to have just over 100,000 Rand going into your savings pot and just over 200,000 Rand going into your retirement pot. What that means is that you can access that 100,000 Rand on an annual basis. But again, as I mentioned earlier, that will then increase your gross income for that year, for that tax year. And again, as I mentioned, we're still not sure how that amount will be taxed, but what they are saying is at a marginal rate, or it's a whole withholding tax process. So that is what is available on an annual basis from your savings pot. From a withdrawal perspective, and I have mentioned this already, from your vested pot, you can take the full amount in cash, irrespective of whether it's in the vested or the non-vested. So if I go back to the slide, from a Provident Fund member perspective, if you resign from the company and you leave the fund, you then can access that full benefit in cash. It also then says that, or the legislation says that, if you have any amounts left in the savings pot, and let's say hypothetically you've already taken out your minimum of 2,000 Rand or more out of this pot. If there's any money left in that pot, you cannot access that till the next year. If it's less than 2,000 Rand, you will be able to take that out when you withdraw from the fund. Nothing from the retirement pot will be available to the member in cash. So that means that that money has to stay in that retirement pot, irrespective of whether you transfer it to a new employer's fund or to a preservation fund. That amount you cannot touch, and I'll touch on preservation funds further in the slides. And then you can't split the pot. So let's say you decide to resign from the company and you exit the fund. You have to transfer, and let's say you've made a decision to transfer to a preservation fund. You have to transfer all the pots across to the preservation fund. You cannot leave one of the pots in the existing fund. You can leave all three in the fund, but if you decide to move out of the fund, you have to move all three pots. On death, nothing changes on death. They will still apply Section 37C of the Pension Funds Act, and the amounts will be paid out to your beneficiaries based on the nomination of beneficiary form, and again, the decision made by the trustees of that fund as to how that benefit will be distributed. And obviously the tax applicable to that will be the same as what it is at the moment, where they have a sliding scale for members that have passed away within the retirement fund. Then from a retirement fund perspective, I have mentioned this already, everything in the savings pot can be transferred to your retirement pot, or you can take the benefit in cash. And then again, it depends on what, if you're a provident fund member, you can take the vested portion in cash, but you cannot take, and then the non-vested portion will be split 1/3 cash, 2/3 annuity. And then I have mentioned the de minimis amount of 165,000 Rand. Again, if your vested pot, as well as your retirement pot, equates to less than 165,000 Rand, you can take the full benefit in cash. And the tax tables applicable to retirement will be the same retirement fund tax tables that retirement fund members enjoy at the moment. And then when we look at members who are or who were 55 years and older and belong to a provident fund as at 1 March 2021. Now, when that legislation kicked in, where they changed how a retirement benefit will be paid when members reach retirement in a provident fund, members who were 55 years and older at that particular point in time did not have to or weren't forced to subscribe to the new retirement benefit calculation. So they could continue to, or when they get to retirement, they can still take out their full benefit in cash, and that is subject to the retirement fund's tax tables at that particular point in time. Now, these members have the option to opt into the new two-pot retirement savings system. So what that means is that should they decide that they want to opt into the two-pot savings system, whatever saved in the vested pot at that particular point in time will remain there. They'll no longer be able to contribute to the vested pot. Obviously, if they don't opt into the two-pot savings system, their full contribution will continue to be invested or allocated to that vested pot. If they opt to go the two-pot system into the two-pot system arrangement, they will then stop contributing to that vested pot, and they'll fall in with everyone else where 1/3 of their contributions will go to the savings pot, and the other 2/3 will go to the retirement pot. And then obviously the same rules will apply. Okay, then looking at preservation funds. Now, with the preservation fund, as we know, as per the current rules, you can transfer your full benefit across to either pension preservation or provident preservation, depending on what fund you belong to. And you can access a once-off withdrawal from the preservation fund, whether it's the full benefit or a partial benefit whilst in that preservation fund. Now, what will happen with the 3 pots is that the 3 pots will be transferred across. From a vested pot point of view, you will still be able to make use of that once-off withdrawal, whether it's the full amount or a partial amount. Your savings pot will be transferred across, and obviously there's no longer contributions going into the savings pot, and therefore you'll still be able to access whatever's in that pot as long as it's more than 2,000 Rand. And then obviously with the retirement pot, you won't be able to access that until you reach retirement age. Okay, so what have we learned from other countries? Now, the talk is that when they looked at this legislation, the Treasury felt that members would be better off by applying the system when they get to retirement age. And I think that, and this is my view, I think probably 90% of your retirement fund members, and again, this is just my view, are probably going to access that 1/3 lump sum out of the savings pot on an annual basis. And so the question arises, will they be better off? I think they probably would be. Why? Because now the 2/3 that is going to be sitting in the retirement pot will not be able to be touched until you reach retirement age. So already you're forcing sort of partial preservation. So what we thought we'd do is we thought we'd look at what has happened within other countries. We looked at 2 countries. One was Chile and the other one was Australia. Now, when we looked at these scenarios, in both instances, members were able to access money from their retirement funds, but it was during the period that we went through COVID. So a very different scenario to what we'll be faced with from 1 March 2025. But who's to say we'll never, hope we will never have to experience that again by going through the whole COVID thing and having to shut down, stay indoors, and all those dreadful things. But if we look at 2 examples, and we look at Chile first, we look at what they had done during that COVID period, and they allowed retirement fund members 3 withdrawals over 18-month period. So every 6 months, they were able to access a portion of their retirement savings benefit. What did they do with this money? What did they spend it on during that period? They looked at durable goods, emergency spending, repaying of debt, and then housing savings. And effectively, what a large portion of the retirement fund members did was they actually saved that money. So they took it out of the retirement fund, but continued to save a large portion of it and kept it for a rainy day in case they needed it for an emergency. So that was a bit of a positive thing. And in fact, probably about a year down the line, a lot of them were still sitting with these amounts sitting in their savings accounts. And then we looked at what the possible reduction or impact those withdrawals would have had on members taking money out of the retirement funds. And I'm going to focus on this orange line for now. And as you can see, depending on the member's age, so you have the member's age at the top, and they're changing their future pensions down the side, and you can see that there's probably about a 27% impact on the future pension that they would have received had they not accessed the 3 withdrawals during the period that they were able to do that. From an Australian point of view, the government allowed Australians to withdraw two amounts, and it was a maximum of up to 10,000 Australian dollars, and they gave them 2 periods where they were able to do that. And they probably had, so they have about 3.5 million initial applications. As at the first period that they gave retirement fund members options to withdraw, and then about 1.4 million sort of repeat applications were approved during the second period. So on average, the applications that they looked at, or the drawdowns from the different retirement funds, equated to about 7,000, just over 7,500 Australian dollars. And that equates to about $36.4 billion that actually left retirement funds. And you can see that when they allowed the first amount to be deducted, there's probably about 11% of retirement fund members that actually accessed that amount. And then the second period that they allowed members to deduct or to withdraw an amount, there's about 24% of retirement fund members that actually accessed those amounts. What did they do with the funds? Well, again, one of the highest sort of spend was household expenses, then mortgage repayments, debt repayments, motor vehicle and home repairs, and then sort of arbitrary things going down the list. So things like clothing and footwear, home renovations, TVs, computers, and the likes. And you can just see what people actually spent the money on. So that really gives you an idea of what people spent the money on, and it possibly gives us an idea, although we're not going through a COVID period, but I think we're sitting with a high unemployment rate at the moment in South Africa, and most households are over-indebted. So you'll probably find, as I mentioned, about 90% of people actually access that money on an annual basis, and it'll be interesting to see what they actually do with that money. But this really gives us an idea of what the Chileans and the Australians did with their money. Looking at it from an Australian perspective, how it will impact their retirement income when they get to retirement by actually accessing those two drawdowns, and you can see it's not that big a discrepancy. You can see that depending on the age, and they also looked at incomes, you can see that it would impact the younger members by 2.1%, and the older members by 1.2% of their retirement income when they get to retirement age. Okay, so with that in mind, how will it impact you as a planner and the advice that you're going to give your clients? I think the first thing is that you need to understand what changes will be made to the different retirement funds that they belong to. As I mentioned, and it may not be the case for our salary earners, that you now have access to 1/3 of your contributions. And depending on how much you're contributing to the fund, that can be quite a high amount. So as I used that practical example earlier, if you're contributing a maximum of 27.5% or that cap of 350,000 Rand a year to your retirement fund, potentially you're going to have over 100,000 Rand available to you on an annual basis. Now, if you draw that down, how will that impact the projected values that you've calculated for your clients? And what advice will you give them around that? I guess in most cases, or in a lot of cases, your first point of call in giving your clients advice is to ensure that they pay off their debt, ensure that they save sufficiently so that they can fund their retirement or for whatever they're looking to fund. And then again, it's looking at what type of investment strategy they're going to adopt for that. So you need to understand what is going to happen within those retirement funds, how any drawdowns they make will impact the future value, because I believe that certainly in the lower sort of income earners, you probably find 99% of retirement fund members will access that money. And I think the higher salary earners, that number may be a bit lower. I mean, my assumption is that it would probably be about 90%, maybe lower than that, but we'd have to see what happens on March 2025. Obviously, I mentioned that any amounts that are taken on an annual basis that may have an impact, depending on what tax regime they apply, that could increase the gross income of that member or client for that particular year, which means that it could push them into a higher tax bracket. So they could be on the cusp of one tax bracket. With them drawing down an amount, it could push them into the next tax bracket. And how will that impact the income? How will that impact the tax for that particular year they may have to pay in, and that sort of thing. So again, that's something that you need to factor into your financial planning process. And then we have the investment strategy. Now, from my perspective, we set up, or we assist retirement funds from an asset consulting point of view. We assist retirement funds in implementing the appropriate investment strategy. And that's pretty much what we've been focusing on the last month, is looking at what type of investment strategy, or how are we going to change the investment strategy of the different retirement funds to accommodate the two-pot system. And I guess up until yesterday, I was still assisting clients, as well as the administrators of those clients' retirement funds, on setting up the appropriate investment strategy, or the advice that we've given them for the investment strategy to accommodate the two-pot system on the different retirement fund systems, administration systems. And I guess from a financial planning point, or first of all, from a retirement fund point of view, because of the fact that you're now going to have that retirement pot, in most instances, retirement funds are going to put an investment strategy together that aligns to whatever their default annuity strategy is. So a couple of years ago, each retirement fund had to come up with a default annuity strategy. And the reason why they did that is, one, is because you probably find that about 1% of your retirement funds members have access to financial planners, and the other 99% don't. Yes, they have access to financial planners, but as you know, a lot of you don't work for free. You charge to put a plan together for your clients, and most South Africans can't afford that service. And now suddenly they're forced to buy a pension. So they're not getting advice. So what type of pension are they supposed to buy? And so retirement funds were first forced to buy Treasury was forced to put a default annuity strategy together in place. And so you probably find that, and certainly from my side, I've seen it from an asset consulting point of view, funds would want to align their pre-retirement investment strategy, so the retirement fund investment strategy, with whatever their default annuity strategy is. And now, because of the fact that from a provident fund point of view, members are forced to purchase annuity with 2/3 of their retirement fund savings, and when the two-pot system kicks in, everyone will be forced, well, everyone is forced at the moment to purchase that annuity when they get to retirement age. You're going to align whatever your pre-retirement investment strategy is with your post-retirement investment strategy. So when you're doing or giving your client advice, I'm sure that you've looked at this. You've looked at their total portfolio, so what they have saved from a retail perspective or in their personal capacity, what they have saved in their retirement fund and how that is invested, and how that aligns to your full financial plan. And you've made sure that, as best you can, you've aligned their pre-retirement investment strategy with what they want to do post-retirement. Now, because funds are going to start looking at aligning the retirement fund investment strategy with the default annuity strategy, this may not align with the advice that you've given your client. So that is something that you need to be cognizant of. And then when the two-pot savings system kicks in, you probably find that that savings pot is going to be invested in a very low risk or cautious types portfolio. And depending on the profile of that particular retirement fund or employer that belongs to that retirement fund, they may even invest that savings pot in a money market portfolio. Now, you need to be aware of that when you look at your client's overall investment strategy, because potentially 1/3 of the retirement savings will be invested in a money market portfolio. And you need to be aware of that, and you need to factor that in when you look at your client's overall investment strategy. And then, of course, preservation. You need to understand what is going to happen from a preservation fund perspective. And as I mentioned earlier, for all new preservations going forward, you're going to have the three-pot system, and you'll only be able to access the vested pot as a once-off withdrawal. So again, when giving clients advice to transfer to a preservation fund, you need to make sure that the clients understand that they're still going to have the various pots in that preservation fund. It's not going to fall away, and the same rules will continue to apply within the preservation fund. And that's me. Any questions? Hopefully I can try and answer them. As I said, there's still a couple of grey areas in legislation, and I think that we're still going to look at various changes that are going to be made going forward, post what they released yesterday.
Thank you, Mark. You can stop sharing your presentation now. We have a lot of questions in the chat. We're going to try to get through as many as we can. So let's kick off, Mark. So first question. Does the seeding on the Provident Fund come from the vested and non-vested portion?
So based on what was released yesterday, they said that they will seed proportionately from both the non-vested and the vested portion.
A nice, easy, quick question. Am I understanding it correctly that the savings pot will be capped at 30,000 and that the 1/3 contributions will also be paid to this pot? This will increase the cap above 30,000.
No, so the seeded amount is capped at 30,000. So it's subject to 10% of whatever you have in the vested pot, subject to a cap of 30,000. That will be transferred across to the savings pot, effective 1 March 2025. You can, if your vested pot was substantial, and 30,000 Rand of your money was transferred to the savings pot, you'll be able to access that amount immediately. So 1 March 2025. Your 1/3 contributions will then be paid to the savings pot on a monthly basis. And that could be whatever your 1/3 of your contribution is. You can access any amount of that, subject to a minimum amount of 2,000 Rand. So if you have 1,900 Rand in that pot, you cannot touch it. You have to wait until it gets to 2,000 Rand. If that pot is sitting at 50,000 Rand, you can access 50,000 Rand on an annual basis in the savings pot. There's no cap.
Will the 1/3 be a non-assignable asset, or can it be attached? So I assume by non-assignable, I mean attachable. So currently in a pension fund, your assets are not attachable. Will the 1/3 remain, will the cash pot be attachable or not?
No, it won't be attachable. It's still a retirement fund, and it still won't. The only thing that will apply to your fund is Section 37D of the Pension Funds Act, which looks at what can be deducted from your retirement benefit. And in that instance, it will only be deducted from your vested pot and your retirement pot. So we look at divorce orders, maintenance orders, fraud, and the like.
I'm going to combine the next two questions. They're both about the GPF. So it's about how will this be applied to the government employees pension fund or other defined benefit funds, and how will the government employee pension funds transfer to preservation funds be treated?
So legislation hasn't touched on, or they haven't discussed much from a defined benefit fund within the fund. They're going to look at calculating a 1/3 benefit and then transferring that across, or a 1/3 contribution. But yeah, I mean, they haven't really, if I look at the legislation, there's probably about a paragraph around defined benefit funds. So there's still a lot of work to be done around defined benefit funds. Obviously, that would be applicable to your GEPF. Yeah, as I said, I mean, there's still a lot of grey areas and there's not much around defined benefit funds in legislation at the moment. So it's still something they need to address.
I see another grey area is on retrenchments, which they've been silent on.
Yeah, so retrenchments, I think they'll look at it on a case-by-case basis as to what will be paid out. But again, yeah, as you say, not much said about retrenchments, other than that, look at it on a case-by-case basis. So also one of those grey areas.
Mark, an interesting investment question. Has there been any look at clients that will withdraw the funds purely to change their risk profile, to move from the Regulation 28 portfolio and pension funds to a non-Reg 28 portfolio? So in other words, to withdraw simply to invest to get a higher offshore allocation?
So the only time you can withdraw your funds is if you resign from the company. And that's the only way you can access your funds. If you belong, or if your employer has a retirement fund at the moment, your employment contract would refer to the fact that all full-time permanent employees have to join the fund. So they're obligated to join the fund. The only time they'd be given a choice not to join the fund was if the fund was started a year or two after the employer started and you joined when the employer started. In that instance, you would have given a time period of 12 months to decide whether you want to join the fund or not. And you weren't forced to join the fund. But essentially all new staff, as at the date they actually started the retirement fund, you're obligated to join that fund. And the only time you can access that money is if you resign from the company and then withdraw from the retirement fund. Otherwise, Regulation 28 applies to your retirement fund.
So, Mark, I think the question is slightly different. I think they're asking is whether the cash portion that gets withdrawn every year, will that be withdrawn to simply invest more aggressively?
Well, you can do that, yeah. You can take that cash out and invest it in a non-Regulation 28 portfolio, which is probably the best advice.
So then let me give you the next two questions combined. And this talks about the way the saving pot needs to be invested. So does the saving pot need to be invested aggressively, or the Regulation 28 rules still apply to the saving pot?
So the Regulation 28 rules will still apply to the savings pot. Our thinking from an investment consulting perspective is, and again, we'd have to look at the profile of the membership, but as I said earlier, a lot of members will probably want to access that money. And it's fine if you're high salary earners and your 1/3 contribution is high. It means that your 1/3 or your savings pot will always, or potentially always, be in excess of 2,000 Rand. And so the question is, do you still want to be invested in an aggressive portfolio within that pot? Possibly. I think the main concern comes around, and the investment strategy is looking at sort of your low income earners. And for those earners that their 1/3 probably wouldn't even equate to 2,000 Rand on an annual basis. So If you had to have a stock market crash the day before they want to access their money, suddenly the 2,000 Rand that was available to them has suddenly now gone to, let's say, 1,700 Rand because of the fact that the savings pot was in an aggressive portfolio. That means that they can no longer access that money, and they'll have to wait a few months before they can actually access that money. I mean, from a strategy point of view, you would probably want that savings pot to align with the rest of the strategy within your fund, because the ultimate goal of a retirement fund is to save for retirement. It's not to access the cash as and when you need it, to fund debt or buy a new TV or whatever. So ideally, you'd want to align that savings pot with the rest of the investment strategy in your fund. But I think that most boards of retirement funds would want to invest that money in a cautious, low, stable type portfolio. And depending on the profile of the membership, possibly even a money market portfolio. But we'll have to, and that's certainly, I mean, I have a client that I'm dealing with at the moment where they've gone that route, where they actually want the 1/3 to be invested in a money market portfolio.
Mark, is there any update on whether there's an opt-in or opt-out scenario? And to further that question, it's first is to expand that to RAs, where they've spoken about some of the older RAs legacy RAs being exempt from the two-pot systems.
Yeah, so first of all, from a retirement fund perspective, there's no opt-in or opt-out unless you were 55 as of 1 March 2021. So all members were forced to go the route of the two-pot system. As you said, I mean, RAs will have to comply with the two-pot system as well. There are some legacy RAs that they've exempt from the legislation, and I mean, I'm happy to send a list of which those are, but they expanded on the list yesterday as well, and I don't have that full list in front of me.
Mark, how does the current 500k tax-free on the 3rd get affected going forward? Certainly, that must still apply. So
what they're saying is that, so the only time the 500 tax-free will apply now is on the non-vested portion in your vested pot. Because remember, your non-vested portion, you can take 1/3 in cash, the other 2/3 you have to use to purchase a pension, and that will only be applicable to provident funds. And then obviously your retirement savings pot is 2/3 already. So it won't apply there. So it's only going to apply to the non-vested portion of a provident fund where the 500,000 Rand tax-free will apply. Or if you use the full vested pot let me go back a step. So your vested portion you can access as a cash benefit at retirement. So the 500,000 tax-free will apply. And then your non-vested portion, 1/3 of that, you're able to take out tax-free, or the 500,000 Rand scale will apply.
Mark,
so it's confusing with all these pots.
There's certainly enough pots in this. I think we aptly named this going potty. I think it's going to be a real challenge if you're struggling with it, how the market is going to communicate these changes to everybody. Mark, last question for today. By withdrawing from the savings pot in a year, will that reduce the tax credits you receive for making the total contributions in that year?
So they haven't really commented on that in the legislation, and I haven't seen anything around that. It's actually a good question, but it's something we'll have to look at and get clarity on.
Mark, thank you very, very much for your time. It was incredibly informative, and we had a record turnout and a record number of questions. And we will send out the presentations and the slides after this. I'd like to thank you all for staying with us through Essentials, and we'll see you next month for the next one. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.